We're on. All right,
Okay,
welcome back.
Great.
Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble. This is Chris Clements.
Good morning.
So we thought today we would do just a little bit more background on us
Yeah.
individually. And so maybe Chris, start with, I don't know, I forgot to watch our previous episode to see what I'd already said. So I might repeat myself a little bit. But
we've talked a little bit about, engaging our watchers, listeners, engagers, Light Beer, Dark Money fans in our faith journey.
right.
And what that means and what that means to us. So, in fact, it's something that you've brought up a couple times.
Yeah.
So, and we've had some folks on like Kathy Harrod and like Frank Switzer who've engaged us in that and challenged us, and where faith fits in both politics and then in the business sphere.
Right.
And it's an important piece of our culture, and yet it's growing. In a way, it's dismissed as not important.
Yeah. And I think that it's dismissed because I think people are, we've talked about this on the podcast before, that church attendance is the lowest it's been in, I think, at least maybe history.
Yeah.
It's under 50%, regular churchgoers. And I'm among those. As a guy who grew up in a very faithful LDS home, I'm not a regular churchgoer now. And that's been, a part of my faith journey.
And I guess I'm the exception because
you go.
I getting everyone to church on Sunday, though, there's something like the enemy has in mind of, the arguments you have with your wife and your kids and just getting them out the door is
There are
really
a lot of people,
something.
A lot of people can relate to you.
Yeah, and now with the advent of streaming church, which a lot of churches have done very well, it's just easier. It's easier to stay in your jammies and plop down on the couch. And but what I found with that, the kids don't watch, they don't listen.
Yeah.
It's a different dynamic, and I end up sitting on the couch by myself,
Right?
And trying to take it on, or I'm on my phone or whatever. So I really try to get the family out, and then what happens is invariably when we finally get there, check the kids into Sunday school, find a seat. We're really glad we did.
Exactly.
Kids come out happier, and they actually love each other. It's an amazing thing that happens.
The rest of the week is better. So tell us a little bit about your faith journey.
Yeah, so that's a loaded question. I think I said during the podcast with Frank is I grew up what can only be described as Heinz 57 in terms of faith influences. I was baptized in the Armenian Anglican Church. My grandfather came to this country fleeing the Armenian genocide. And my mother grew up in a mixed family, even by those standards back then, mixed race family of both Italian and Armenian. In fact, my favorite story that my grandfather told me growing up was that he fell in love with my grandmother, who was from an Italian family in Fresno, California. I would have him repeat this story all the time. He actually, and so you have Armenian Anglican folks, very traditional. In fact, the Armenians are considered some of the first Christians in the world. They're the oldest Christians in the world. Armenia is 97% Christian to this day, and surrounded by, what can only be described as some hostile folks. Right. And they've lived out their faith and paid for that for over 1 million people in 1917 being slaughtered by the Ottomans, which finally was recognized by our government, thankfully. But I used to hear this great story of my grandfather, because of all that history and because of all that heaviness. My grandfather actually had to go to his father on the day of his wedding and ask him to come to his wedding. because his father and his mother were not coming. And it wasn't that they were getting married in the church; they were getting married downtown at the courthouse because the church wouldn't marry them.
Right.
Both the Armenian church wouldn't marry them, and the Catholic church wouldn't marry them.
Right.
So that sort of heaviness of religion, which to me as a kid seemed crazy, which is why I would ask him to tell me the story all the time. So the story goes, he goes to his dad and he says, I don't know what he called his dad, probably Papa, whatever. He says, I'm in love with this woman. I'm going to spend the rest of my life with her. You need to come to my wedding. And his dad refuses. And he says, I'm going to get emotional about this. He says, if you don't come to my wedding, then I am no longer your son. And you will never see your grandchildren, and I will never speak to you ever again. His father showed up.
Good for him.
And actually my grandmother, the Italian, this Italian woman, took care of them. Was actually the one in the family who really engaged them, her in-laws, and took care of them. In fact, I remember going to their home in Fowler. Gosh, I was 3, 4 maybe, and his mother lived with them for a period of time. I called her Big Grandma. She couldn't speak a lick of English, but she was there, and my grandmother took care of her. So you had that on my mom's side, and then you had this very evangelical Southern Baptist influence on my dad's side. And my grandmother, Pat, was probably the biggest influence on my faith journey because she was, like I said, she was Southern Baptist. She was very much into like the Bible is the Word of God, and there's nothing more important than the Bible. And so I was really into comic books back then. With a boy who likes comics, I probably still am. And so she would buy me these Bible comic books. And now there's a Bible now called the Action Bible. I don't know if you've seen it.
No, I haven't.
It's amazing. So it's basically all the stories of the Bible, all the chapters of the Bible, written and drawn in comic book fashion, like graphic novel quality fashion, which is amazing because that's sort of what she was trying to get with me, to understand all these great stories and all these great truths, which I just remember sitting with her and her reading with me. And but I did, the first church I went to here in Phoenix was Bethany Bible Church, which is right on 7th Avenue and Bethany Home. Mm-hmm. I remember loving it. I remember just thinking, wow, this is amazing. And it was very Bible focused, just like what my grandmother had been teaching. And when we moved to Tucson in 1974, we tried going to a Baptist church in Tucson called Catalina Baptist. And we were told to leave because of the business we were in.
Oh.
In fact, my mom to this day, God bless her, I mean, she brings that up to people. And that was just sort of the times back then, It's just the 70s. And even, people put people in boxes in terms of their faith and in terms of their religion. And so we ended up growing up and going to St. Albans Episcopal Church, which... and I grew up Episcopalian, which is sort of like light Catholic.
Yeah.
And loved our church,
very different than Baptist.
Very, very different. So I don't know how, again, because of the heaviness of those two paths. My dad, I have some of his letters that he sent to my grandmother. Very evangelical, very, very Baptist upbringing, and. So I think between the Catholic Anglican upbringing and the evangelical upbringing, they sort of,
mashed
compromised
together.
and went with the Episcopalian Church, which
didn't shun alcohol,
which
the way
did
the
not
Baptists
shun alcohol
or the Mormons.
And my dad actually helped build that church, and he was on the building committee, and He did a lot. In fact, if you go to St. Albans in Tucson, you go in the lobby. There's a plaque there. It's my mom and dad are prominently, featured there. But regardless, I mean, like most kids growing up, and you dabble in your faith, right? You don't really. We moved to Midtown Tucson back in I want to say 1983, and we stopped going to St. Albans. We didn't really find another church, and I really didn't start not questioning, but trying to explore who Jesus was until midway through my time at the University of Southern California. And I had certain people around me who were really meeting with me and talking. I was going to Campus Crusade for Christ meetings and thinking, wow, this is a really interesting place. I didn't realize that all these beautiful girls that I knew from, the sorority houses were Jesus followers. And I didn't even know what that meant back then.
Right.
But that was the type of terminology they were using. And then I moved to Washington, D.C. right after college, and got very involved with some folks who put on the National Prayer Breakfast. In fact, I lived in an intern house that they had out in College Park at the University of Maryland my first summer in Washington, D.C. And then I got to learn about a place called the Cedars out in Virginia, where all these leaders meet with this guy named Doug Coe. And Doug has been hosting the prayer breakfasts for both the Senate and House side for 40 years,
Right.
Very quietly. And so these prayer breakfasts that happen in the House and the Senate then have become like the national prayer breakfast.
Right.
And so then you get these stories of, because the press likes to say that Republicans and Democrats just don't like each other, they don't get along, and blah blah blah. And then fast forward to this guy named Barack Obama getting elected as a senator from the state of Illinois, and he starts going to these prayer breakfasts, and one of his best friends is Tom Coburn, who, before he died, I mean, they were still very, very close, and they were very, very close for a reason, because they believed that this guy Jesus was real, and so that's stuff that just has had a great impact on me, and yet I felt for a long time after my dad died in 1995 that I was just alone, and I talked a good game in terms of my faith, but I lived in a state of darkness and anger, and that still plagues me from time to time. And so I didn't really fully commit my life, fully, a whole heart, like Jesus is number one, until 2015, in March of 2015. And a lot of things led me to that journey. One, like I said, I had a lot of anger and frustration after my dad died. He died of brain cancer, of lung cancer, but they had found a tumor in his brain. It was December 18th, 1994, and he died on February 23rd, 1995.
So fast.
It was so fast, and then you're inundated with all these people coming around, and you've got this business, you've got a family to take care of. It was a lot for a 25-year-old kid. I mean, I was, and like I said, I talked a good game, and but it was a really tough journey, and it took some. I don't need to go into it on the podcast, but it took some real come to Jesus words by my wife during a really dark night out one night, and she said it to me very plainly. She said, listen, you know, we can stay together and keep doing this, or you can figure out what's going on here. And so I contacted a buddy of mine who I had been who actually we will have on the show by the name of John Desser. And he got me around some pastors who kind of really helped me confront my demons, for lack of a better term. And you want to talk about wrestling with God. I spent about 6 or 7 hours in a room wrestling with God and seeing some things about myself and about my family history, this heaviness of all that I described earlier, the religion, and Armenian Anglican Church, and the Catholic Church, and all these things come into your walk.
Right.
And then you've got family history, you've got all this stuff that you carry with you that you don't know about. And so a lot of what I did during that time with John and these other pastors was confront that, look at it. And I can only describe the next day in the way that it's described in the Bible when Paul is he's blinded after his confrontation with Jesus on the road to Damascus, and then he's saved by the scales falling from his eyes.
Right.
I had a similar experience the next day, and since that time, it's been, I could call it all about Jesus. It's just been about following him, seeing where it leads. I could not have gotten through the sale of our company if I wasn't in that mindset. I quit drinking. People thought I was crazy. I lost like 30, 40 pounds. People thought I was sick. There was all sorts of rumors about, what sort of thing I might be afflicted with.
Right.
It was horrible. And that was coming from members of my family. So you can imagine. And, but it really was just a cleansing. It was all this stuff that I had carried with me for so long. And I still have some of it that I struggle with. Today I'm sitting here struggling with a little bit of it. But it's all, I just had a renewed commitment and understanding that the hardest thing I had to learn during that time is this idea, it's not even an idea, this truth that God's got it. No matter what you're going through, no matter what space you're in, God's got it. He's in it. And that was a really tough lesson. It's still a tough lesson. I still have to remind myself, God's in it. I know you want this, but for whatever reason, God has you here. And it's okay. So it's like I always allude to Rocky Balboa and his speech to his son. Just keep moving forward because nothing's going to hit as hard as life.
That's so true.
And it's not how hard you hit, it's how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. I feel like life is that. But what's your anchor? And your anchor can't be your job, your title, your status. If those are your anchors, you're going to fail. And that was a tough lesson for me because a lot of my identity was wrapped up in this business that I had. It was wrapped up in who my dad was. It was wrapped up in who I thought I was in the community or the state or whatever. And it was all a lie. Those are the things I told myself.
Right.
But really, if you're not willing to get in the dirt and the mud and the mire and wrestle with God every single day and understand that it's all about him and he's got it, you're going to be in for a world of hurt.
Yeah. Great point. Well, that's quite a journey.
It has been quite a journey, but it's not, it's
And it's
I
not
can say
ended.
It's not your story. I made a speech, a graduation speech to YPO, Arizona, I guess it's been 2 years since I made that speech because we just had our first YPO graduation in person after 2 years, a couple weeks ago. I went back and I looked at what I said because you're just you forget and you're kind of curious. And my big message at the end was like, your life, your story is still being written. You're not bound by your past. And that's kind of why we have the title of Light Beer, Dark
Yep,
Money. You're not
exactly.
bound by that stuff. That's stuff of the world. And the world will beat you down and keep you there if you let it.
Well, and the world wants to bind you to your past, right? I mean, that's because you get defined or you get pigeonholed or somebody has a viewpoint of you and they don't want to change that viewpoint because it's just convenient to have another viewpoint. But I think it's important that we all are evolving in the sense of we're all going to learn, we're all going to, battle things. There's going to be challenges, but the anchor, as you point out, needs to be God.
Yeah. My dad got that. He got that at a very early age. My grandmother got that. All my grandparents tried to instill that in us. But you gotta figure it out for yourself. And I've been really blessed. I've got to meet my heroes in life. I've got to do a lot of really fun things. And now I'm doing, for the first time in a long time, I'm doing the stuff I really love. And but it was on God's timing. He and I were having it out about whether I should stay in the business or get out of the business back in March of 2015.
Right.
And guess what? He won because he had told some friends of mine who were in deep prayer for me 2 years before that he was yanking me out. In fact, it was John's wife, Contessa. She sat me down after a Passover dinner. She was like, "Hey, listen, I've been having this conversation, and God really wants a deep, meaningful relationship with you, but He can't have it as long as you're a golden eagle." True story.
It's amazing.
And I'm like, that's crazy. What are you talking about? Well, guess what? It wasn't her timing. It wasn't my timing. It was His. And God took me out of a situation that was incredibly toxic, not life affirming in terms of the things I wanted to be doing. And it was time. It was time. We had reached a great pinnacle. The business was changing. The way we were trying to manage the business was inconsistent with those changes. And we'd, for lack of a better term, we had outstretched ourselves, and it was time. And I have no regrets. I have regrets maybe in the manner of it was done.
Well, sure,
but I have no regrets. I mean, especially, gosh, with the pandemic, I can't even imagine trying to manage through that. Well, all these companies, we're going to hear from some of them.
Yeah.
But just can't imagine.
Yeah. Well, and so my journey is a little bit different because you came to, over the course of your life, to a certain point in adulthood when you figured out where you were. I grew up in a very traditional Mormon home, LDS home, and, believer, that kind of thing. I had no doubt in my mind when I was 18 years old that Jesus Christ was my Savior. It was completely affirmed for me. But what I didn't know at the time was that doesn't necessarily mean that you follow all the prescriptive path. as a Mormon kid, which I was following, and I did for many years. I went on a mission. I married a woman that I met on my mission who was also a missionary, so she was older than I was. I was very young. I was 21 when we got married, and I was 23 when we had our first child. And I wasn't happy. And I was obviously thrilled with the birth of my children. But I was thinking that I was living this idyllic Mormon life and thinking that I was happy, but always in the back of my head, it was like, what's going on? And I had positions in the church that were of importance. The last one I had was I was a bishop, and that's not like in the Catholic Church, big deal. I was over a congregation, and in the Mormon Church, all of the church positions or lay positions are unpaid, so it's a volunteer thing. And it was a challenge because I really loved being a bishop. I thought that I was helping people, but I was also very busy with work. I was traveling back and forth to D.C. on a pretty regular basis. And so my tenure as a bishop, bishops usually go about 5 years. I went, I think 4, maybe just under. And it was when I was released as bishop that I was kind of looked up and I was like, I am not a happy person. And what I realized was I was really relying on the role as a bishop to give me fulfillment. And to some degree as a father, I was not a great father. I was very absent. And I was essentially not a husband.
Yeah.
So here I was supposedly living this idyllic, Christ-centered Mormon lifestyle, and it was a mess.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I took a step back, I decided that I was going to follow my heart, realized that the marriage wasn't going to work, and hadn't worked for many years, and decided to go through what I thought would be a pretty easy process to start, but then it became a very messy and expensive and hard process going through the divorce. But during that process is when I realized that there's a reason I was going through it. It was because God wanted me to be happy, and I was grateful for the things that happened in my life up to that point, but I realized that they were pointing me towards a totally different path than what I had thought. For example, when you're a Mormon bishop and the stake president's going to, move on, the bishops are the ones that are the most likely to become the next stake president. And so our stake president left. He was released, and for a moment I was like, "Whoa, what if I became the stake president?" There's a lot of advancement through the church, and some of the most amazing people I know are in the church leadership. But I chose a different path, and going through the divorce, and I'd already known Alyssa, who's my wife now. We'd worked together, and I realized that this is the person that I need to be with. Mm-hmm. And she's how I'm going to find real happiness. But the path to get there was very challenging. And so, whereas for some people it's just say, put God behind me, this is the route I want to go. I really viewed this is God directing me, which for those who are, devout Mormon sounds pretty antithetical to their belief. And I was invited to leave the church.
Yeah.
And I did. So I'm not Mormon. And I wouldn't say that. And what's interesting about my story, you talk to most ex-Mormons, they're not. They have pretty strong feelings about the Mormon Church because they left for really specific reasons. Some of my siblings are among those.
Yeah.
They have nothing good to say about the church. I'm very different in that regard because I still have a lot of respect for the church. I still believe some of the basic tenets of Mormon religion and doctrine, even though I'm not a active participant in the religion. So, I've told people the most important 2 years of my life was when I went on my church mission to Indiana, because that taught me so many things and prepared me for so much of what has happened in my life. But getting to the point where I was able to marry Alyssa, and we've had Reagan, our just over 2 years old, and then last week, little Vincent came.
Vincent the Noble. Yes.
And I don't know.
Or he could just be called Vinny,
Right. That's right.
It's one of the others.
So
Sir Vincent.
we were toying around with 4 different names. So two of my sons from my previous marriage are Adam and Seth, and they're very Old Testament names. So I was kind of leaning towards like a New Testament name like Luke or Matthew or something. And then Leo got into the mix and Jake or Jack. And so it was just, we were having a hard time. When Reagan when we found out that Alyssa was pregnant with a girl, she said her name's going to be Reagan. I was like, really? She's like, yeah. I'm like, well, everyone's going to think that I named the kid.
Yeah, that's true.
Everyone does.
Everyone did.
But so it's 15 minutes before, and we've talked about this. So Alyssa's had some challenges with the pregnancy, and she was on bed
You've had
rest.
quite a couple weeks.
This has been
leading up to this.
a month or so. Yeah. Water breaks. It's 9:40 at night. It's a week before she's supposed to go off bed rest, so she's at 35 something weeks. And I'm like, whoa! And then 3 hours later, he's born. It was just the most surreal, fastest. It was. If I didn't, you can't watch that experience and have any flicker of faith and not understand that God's hand was there. It's 15 minutes or so before he's born. I was like, I don't know if these names feel right. I was like, what about Vin? She's like, Vin? I was like, Vince, Vincent. Because I was thinking of Vin Scully.
You were thinking of this. I wasn't going to say it. I wasn't going to go there. But if you're going to go there.
She caught on immediately because she just recently, Vin Scully was part of a video tribute to Willie Mays for his birthday.
Yeah. I've not seen that, but I've heard about it.
Oh, it's great. Vin Scully is amazing. And she said, I don't hate it. And she's a diehard Giants fan. So that tells you that there's definitely some compromise. There's some compromise. She said, Vin said some very nice things about Willie Mays, so I think I can accept this. So thank you, Vin Scully. You have a namesake. But it's Vincent Florence Noble, and Vincent is, we came up with, Florence is the middle name of her grandfather, Grandpa Joe, who passed away earlier this year. And Reagan's middle name is it's Jean, Barbara Jean Scannell, who is the middle name of Alyssa's grandmother. So they'll be the namesakes for her grandparents, which is pretty cool.
That's good.
Anyway, so with marrying Alyssa, having Reagan, now having Vin, I, for the first time in my life, understand true happiness. And my relationship with my other kids is great. They love their siblings. So it's been, even though it was so difficult and such a turn away from the traditions of the LDS Church to go through what I went through, I know that I was being guided, and that was my walk of faith. And and I'm, you know, as you said, it's still a journey. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know if I go back to the Mormon church, if I become a Catholic. I don't know. So
Well, you're welcome to come to church with us sometime.
I know you've invited me. I know you invited me. So two very different paths of faith. You very firm in your foundation, and me having had a foundation, realizing that was not necessarily what was right for my happiness in finding true love. And so now it's a whole future, and I've got, you know, two very young children to carry that forward.
And yet I think what's really interesting about both these stories is that they point to the same truth, and that is all the stuff of the Mormon church, which I can't even, this has been a nice educational foundation for me, because I have a lot of Mormon friends, but I don't know a lot about the church. In fact, a very prominent family down in Tucson who I love and adore, they're very involved with their church, and the Rustan family, which everyone knows the Rustans.
Yeah.
So you grow up around it, but you don't really understand it. And then I know enough about the Catholic Church, and then all these different, you know, all this stuff that we think points to Jesus, but really does it, you know? And I think your journey, my journey to a certain extent, but it all came to the point where, you know, all this stuff that we grew up with, the rules, the boundaries, all this, it's important, but it's not what's important.
Yeah. For me, and I knew that this was true at a young age, but I didn't understand until very much later that it's about your personal relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
It's not you find Jesus through a religion. You have to find him personally.
Yeah.
And you know, and you can be something other than Christian and find your center in what other way you find that. But for Christians, obviously
and that the radical idea that grace, well, we named our first daughter. Actually, it was not a biblical thing. It was after the U2 song, Grace. But
that's almost biblical.
Yeah. But there's some biblical themes in that song. But that grace is a free gift. It's not something you earn. It's not something that you have to work for. It's a free gift. And I think what religion tries to do is, you know, try to teach that, there's all these things you have to do to gain favor with God or Jesus.
Or that you can't do.
Or that you can't do. And if you do those things, you'll never have favor with God. And the truth is, your story's being written. There's always a time, I tell everyone, there's always a time when God's going to have you on your knees and you're going to have nowhere else to turn. And what you do then is the most important thing of your life. And that was the other sort of message of my speech back to YPO, was that, hey, faith is real, Jesus is real, and he's coming for you. How that happens, I don't know, but he's coming.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to have a time in your life where you're going to have to decide.
Yeah.
And we had this discussion with Kathy last week. I mean, she had that sort of awakening where, you know, I think the meaning of life comes down to one simple question. Was Jesus who he said he was? And the Catholic Church can't decide that for you. The Mormon Church can't decide that for you. The Episcopalian Church, the Lutheran, go down every denomination, whether you like it or agree with it or not, and they all have their issues. They can't decide that for you. You need to decide that for yourself.
Ultimately, it has to be
and once you decide that
decision,
you know, it'll change your life.
Yep. Well, our lives have been changed.
Yeah.
For better and worse. Mostly for better.
All for the better.
All for the better. We go through, but again, you know, what I learned was that I had to face my greatest fears to actually get to true happiness.
Yeah.
And that was facing decisions that I would be judged by. You know, I made decisions that, you know, people were highly judgmental of me, and they had every right to be, because it was against what they were believing, what I was taught, what I was teaching.
Sure.
But once I was willing to have the courage to say, I need to find real happiness, and this is the darkness I'm going to have to go through to get there. Absolutely, 100% would do it every single time to be where I am today.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, hopefully your faith story is maybe not as rocky as ours, but feel free to share it.
It's a musical journey.
Yes,
Somebody once said.
It's a great way to put
It's
it.
a musical journey.
So good.
Well, I'm always going to throw YouTube references in this.
And I will always be very happy about that. I was actually playing a little bit of U2 for Vincent last night.
Oh, yeah?
Strumming on the guitar. I don't know the guitar well. I will just caveat it that way, but I can riff a couple. I can play Van Diemen's Land, and I can play a little bit of.
That's great.
Yeah. So
I need to hear that.
okay,
Can you
you'll be
sing it?
sorely disappointed. On a good day. On a good day. All right. On that point.
Yeah.
Thanks for
I didn't
listening.
even get to why you choose part of my faith journey.
Oh, well,
That's an whole other
okay.
podcast.
Well, we'll do a musical podcast,
Yeah, we could do that.
and we need to do we've got a lot we got to cover. So we'll end this one and get going on the next one.
Yeah. If you were to draw a straight line through my faith journey,
U2's
U2 was there.
U2 is
They
there.
were there. They were there for a lot of kids growing up in the 80s.
Yeah,
Who got it.
absolutely.
So,
Good.
all right. Well,
Thanks
signing
for
off.
listening.
Thanks for listening.
See ya.